Hey everybody, just want to make some quick announcements in this video. So we are actually rapidly coming up towards the end of the class here. Basically, we've got 3 weeks here. So we've got this week, we could think of this as week 14. This is kind of our medieval week. Then we've got next week, we're going to talk about China one more time, talk about other things going on, such as in the Americas. And then finally, we're going to have our last week be our exam week. So that's going to be the week of the 5th and the 7th. Those are going to be the last days of class. So it would probably be good to be, just be aware of that. We will have a review discussion on that second to last day. We'll talk a little bit about the end of the medieval world, and we'll talk about some other things as well. So it'll be a review day. You might notice that that at the very end we're going to have a paper be due, and the day that's going to be due is one day after you take the exam. So that is going to be on the 8th, and that's going to be, fingers crossed, but ideally enough time for me to be able to get those graded and turned in so that we can have everything done. Yeah, so it might be good to start thinking about what do you want to do for that final paper. Looking at a lot of different materials from the class, and I'm going to scroll up here to the different possibilities here. So all of them involve looking at particular civilizations. So the way to do it is just to follow the little paragraph long prompt for each of these. So here are the options that you can work with. You could compare two civilizations that we've discussed in this course. This is a pretty popular one. You could compare the Romans to the Olmecs. You could compare the Greeks to the Mycenaean Greeks, although I guess you could also think of those as different time periods of the same one. But you could compare India to China, anything you want to do with that. So any of the civilizations we've looked at. And the trick would be to answer these questions. How does each civilization approach the problems of human existence? How do these civilizations compare? Do you think one is more successful than the other? Those would be the questions that you'd answer for this particular prompt. Then, like I said, you can also compare a civilization at an early point in its history to a later period. So if you want to think of the Mycenaean Greeks as the same civilization as later Greeks, you could do that. You could talk about early Rome versus later Rome. You could talk about classical Greece versus Hellenistic Greece. You could talk about early China versus later China. So that's a possibility as well. You could talk about how different civilizations have approached gender roles in art and culture. You could talk about a particular style of art. For instance, a lot of the civilizations we've looked at, we have had something to do with sculpture, or a lot of them have had something to do with architecture. Pretty much every civilization has something to do with architecture. Everybody's got to have architecture. So you could compare, say, the architecture of China to the architecture of ancient Greece. And you could look at all of the different styles of architecture throughout time. If you like, you could look at like many different styles of architecture, bring in Mesopotamia as well and Egypt. Think about that. You could look at a particular world religion. We're still kind of digging into the ways that world religions change the world, but you can look at that, how the adherents of that movement understand the problems of life and how they try to solve the problems of life. And do you think they've been successful? These are questions we've kind of been looking at already. And finally, one of the most fun is a day in the life. So in this one, you would imagine yourself or imagine a character as a member of of an ancient society, of one of these ancient civilizations, and you would try to describe what would an ordinary day in your life look like. Where would you go? What would you do? How would you feel about things? And the goal would be to make specific references to things that we've looked at in this class. So if you were in Rome, you might talk about the Colosseum or the chariot races. Those could be good. It's pretty open-ended. You can be pretty creative with it, so long as you try and show, that you're using historical details that we're bringing in to help us understand what these people's lives were like a little bit better. So that's going to be the first part. This is going to actually be two parts, each about 4 pages. In the first 4 pages, you tell your story. In the second 4 pages, you explain what kind of research you did to write this scene. Basically say, what are your arguments about history and where are you getting your ideas from? You would describe, how you used these ideas to develop your character, what challenges you faced. Like, was there something that you found hard to figure out in terms of history, or was there something that you were really, thought that you came up with a pretty good understanding of it. Whatever you can think of, and then talk about how historians and historical writers relate to what you did. So yeah, so I think that's a pretty fun one if you want to take that option to look at what a historical story might be like in the process of constructing a historical story. So I had it here as May 7th, but I'm going to change it to May 8th. So May 8th, I'll update this syllabus here. May 8th is when everything's going to be due. So midnight on May 8th, when you've got to have your exam turned into me online. I won't be able to take it any longer after that because I got to get the grades in on Thursday. If you need, if you're worried about that, then maybe get a little bit of a head start. I think I will probably open it up a little bit early. So if you want to turn it in early, like say turn it in on the 7th or even the 6th, you could do that as well. Whatever seems best to you. And then the 7th is going to be the day of our final exam. Does that all make sense? Let me know if you have questions. Anything you're wondering about or need clarification on any of this. Feel free to just send me questions on the website. Okay, now we will move on to talking about the medieval period. All right.